Week 17 highlights. It's hard to imagine we're already into the playoffs. Let's take a look at all the games that happened on Sunday with playoff implications. And best of all, there were no cancellations this year. There were postponements, but we got through the whole season. The NFL is the only league as of now to get through a season without having to cancel or having to shut down the season. Let's start off in Cleveland first. The Cleveland Browns were trying to punch their ticket to the playoffs for the first time since 2003 with the win over the Steelers. Pittsburgh had already clinched the AFC North and had most of their second strings playing. Mason Rudolph got the start for the Steelers as the starting quarterback. The Browns took an early 7-0 lead thanks to a 47-yard rushing touchdown from Nick Chubb. However, the Steelers kept hanging around. Not much happened for the rest of the first half as Cleveland and Pittsburgh would both get late field goals. The Browns had a 10-6 lead at half. Baker Mayfield in the third quarter would find Austin Hooper and Jarvis Landry to go up 24-9. The AFC champs would come back, but missed the two-point conversion to fall to the Browns 24-22. Baker Mayfield was 17 of 27 for 196 yards and one touchdown. Nick Chubb rushed for 108 yards and one TD. Rashard Higgins had two receptions for 56 yards. For the Steelers, Mason Rudolph was 22 of 29 for 315 yards, two touchdowns, and one interception. James Conner rushed for 37 yards, and Chase Claypool had 5 catches, 101 yards, and 1 TD. Bucs versus Falcons. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosted their rival, the Atlanta Falcons. The Buccaneers were hoping to get their 11th win of the season and officially clinch the 5th seed in the NFC. Tom Brady balled out on Sunday and helped Tampa reach the playoffs for the first time since 2007. Brady threw not one, not two, not three, but 4 TD passes in a blowout 44-27 win over Atlanta. Atlanta did try to make a comeback, but it wasn't good enough. Tampa outscored Atlanta in the fourth quarter 21-7. With the win, the Buccaneers finished the season at 11-5 and the Falcons at 4-12. Atlanta will now have the number 4th pick in the upcoming draft, which will be held in Cleveland, Ohio. The Bucs will travel to take on the NFC East champs, the Washington football teams. Brady was 26 of 41 for 399 yards, 4 TDs, and 1 interception. Ronald Jones rushed for 78 yards and 1 TD. Antonio Brown had one of his best games as a Buccaneer with 138 yards and 2 TDs. Could this be Matt Ryan's final game in a Falcon uniform? Well, he threw for 265 yards, 2 TDs, and was 29 of 44. Brian Hill had 94 yards on the ground, and Russell Gage had 9 receptions for 91 yards. He also added 1 receiving touchdown. Now we go to Cincy. The 10-5 Baltimore Ravens were looking to clinch a playoff berth with a win over the Cincinnati Bengals. Baltimore had won 4 straight at this point. They won their last two, or the Bengals, however, won their last 2 games, upset over the Steelers and Texans. But the NFC North champions from last year dominated the Bengals for a 3rd consecutive trip to the postseason. The Ravens won 38-3 as Lamar Jackson became the first NFL quarterback to rush for over 1,000 yards in 2 seasons, and he did it in back-to-back seasons. He continues to prove the doubters wrong. The Ravens took an early 17-3 lead at half and did not look back. They ended up winning the game 38-3. Lamar Jackson threw for 113 yards, 10 of 18 passes, 3 TDs, and 1 interception. J.K. Dobbins had 13 carries for 160 yards and 2 TDs. Miles Boykin had 1 reception for 43 yards. Brandon Allen was 6 of 21 for 48 yards and 2 picks. Trevion Williams rushed for 74 yards and 4 carries, and Keithan Carter had 1 catch for 21 yards. Now we go to Buffalo. A showdown took place in the AFC East on Sunday. The Dolphins were just 1 game away from clinching a playoff berth. Buffalo had already clinched the AFC East and had nothing to really play for. However, they still played their stars in the first half, and they didn't miss a beat. The AFC East champs steamrolled the Dolphins by winning 56-26 as Josh Allen threw for 224 yards and 8 of 25 passes, 3 TDs, and 1 interception. Despite Allen throwing an interception in the first drive, Buffalo had a 28-6 lead in the first half. Buffalo's defense forced Miami turnovers as Tua Tagovailoa threw 3 interceptions. Tua might not be the future for the Dolphins as they desperately needed their closer, Ryan Fitzpatrick. He was out because of COVID-19. The Dolphins do have the number 3 overall pick in the upcoming draft and have a big question to make about quarterback. Antonio Williams rushed for 63 yards on the ground and 2 TDs. For Miami's Salvon Ahmed, he rushed for 29 yards on 6 carries and added 1 TD. Devontae Parker had 7 receptions for 116 yards. Now we go to Soldier Field in Chicago. The Green Bay Packers were looking to clinch the top overall spot in the NFC with the win over the Bears. The Bears needed a win or a Cardinals loss. The Bears took an early 7-0 lead as David Montgomery had a rushing touchdown. Rodgers would tie the game with a TD pass in the next drive to Robert Tonyan. The 2-time MVP would throw 2 more TD passes in the first half to go up 21-13. The Packers would score 2 more touchdowns in the second half to officially beat the Bears 35-16 and sweep them for the year. Aaron Rodgers threw 4 TD passes, 19 of 24, 240 yards, and no interceptions. Aaron Jones rushed for 42 yards and 1 TD. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had 2 receptions for 87 yards and 1 touchdown. On the other side, Mitchell Trubisky played pretty solidly. He was 33 of 42 for 252 yards, but he did throw 1 interception. David Montgomery rushed for 69 yards and 22 carries, and Darnell Mooney had 11 receptions for 193 yards. Now we go to Carolina, where the New Orleans Saints traveled to take on the Panthers. The New Orleans Saints were aiming to finish the season with a 12-4 win over the Panthers. New Orleans did not have a chance to get the number 1 seed in the NFC, but still had a chance to get the 2 seed with a win over division rival Carolina. The Saints struck first with a touchdown pass from Drew Brees to Jared Cook. The Panthers scored on a Rodney Smith rushing touchdown to tie the game, but that was the only time the Panthers were even with the Saints. The NFC South champions outscored the Panthers 26-0 and forced 2 interceptions from Bridgewater. P.J. Walker came in the game and had 3 interceptions because of an ankle injury with Teddy Bridgewater. Drew Brees threw for 201 yards, 22 of 32, and 3 TD passes. Ty Montgomery rushed for 105 yards and 18 carries. Emmanuel Sanders had 9 receptions for 63 yards and 1 TD. Teddy Two Gloves was 13 of 23 for 176 yards and 2 interceptions. Rodney Smith rushed for 40 yards on 10 carries and 1 touchdown. Curtis Samuel had 7 receptions for 118 yards. Rams versus Cardinals. Both the Cards and Rams were looking to officially clinch a playoff berth with a win over Sunday. LA was 9-6 and Arizona was 8-7. The Rams had to start John Wolford because of an injury to Jared Goff. It was Wolford's first game in his career. Wolford is from Wake Forest and now are used to play in the now debunked American Alliance of Football League. He led the league in touchdown passes with 14 before it folded. Kyler Murray, despite an injury, started the game but left after injuring his ankle. Chris Streveler from the CFL and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers replaced Kyler Murray. Streveler threw a touchdown pass in his first series as QB for Arizona. He was 11 of 16 for 105 yards, 1 TD, and 1 interception. The Cards jumped out to a 7-0 lead, but that was the only lead they had in the game, as the Rams would have a 12-0 run at the end of the first half to go up 12-7. The Cardinals did not score any more points and had their field goal blocked in the third quarter. The Rams would get 2 more field goals and beat the Cardinals 18-7 to officially clinch the 6th seed in the NFC playoffs. LA, as we all know, got a playoff win, and they will take on the Seattle Seahawks in the opening round. With the loss, the Cardinals are officially out of the playoffs, and the Bears, despite losing to the Packers, are now in as the 7th seed. Kenyon Drake rushed for 36 yards and 10 carries, and Dan Arnold had 3 receptions for 46 yards. John Wolford was 22 of 38 for 231 yards and 1 pick. He led the Rams in rushing as well with 56 yards. Cam Akers had 4 receptions for 52 yards. The Jacksonville Jaguars had clinched the top pick in the upcoming draft with a loss last week to the Bears. They are 1-14. They travel to take on the 10-5 Colts, who were looking back to get in the playoffs with a win. They would get help from Buffalo, who beat the Dolphins. The Colts jumped out to a 17-0 lead thanks to Jonathan Taylor and T.Y. Hilton's TDs. Jacksonville did eventually score, but trailed 20-7.5. The Colts would get 1 more touchdown and hold on to beat the Jags 28-14. Jonathan Taylor rushed for 253 yards and 30 carries and 2 touchdowns. If it wasn't for Justin Herbert, Jonathan Taylor might get Offensive Rookie of the Year. Phillip Rivers was 17 of 27 for 164 yards, 1 TD, and 1 interception. Nyheim Hines had 6 receptions for 50 yards. Jacksonville's leading passer was Mike Glennon as he threw for 261 yards, 26 of 42, and 2 touchdown passes. Dare Ogunbowale rushed for 50 yards on 14 carries, and Chris Conley had 7 receptions for 87 yards. A showdown in the NFC West took place on Sunday. The playoff-bound Seattle Seahawks and champions of the NFC West traveled to Arizona to take on the rival San Francisco 49ers, who won the NFC East last year. The 49ers were already eliminated from playoff contention, but the Seahawks still had somewhat of a shot to clinch home field advantage throughout the rest of the playoffs with a Packers and Saints loss. But, of course, that didn't happen. However, the Seahawks still wanted to beat the rival and last year's champs for the NFC South. San Fran hung around and played Seattle tough, but the Seahawks were just better. The Seahawks would hold on to win 26-23 thanks to a big game from Russell Wilson in the second half as he threw 2 touchdowns, both to Tyler Lockett. Alex Collins also had a rushing touchdown. Jeff Wilson, the 49ers, got a rushing touchdown, but it wasn't good enough. For the stats, Russell Wilson was 20 of 36 for 181 yards and 2 touchdown passes. Chris Carson rushed for 44 yards. and Tyler Lockett had 12 receptions, 90 yards, and 2 TDs. CJ Beathard was 25 of 37 for 273 yards and 1 touchdown pass. Jeff Wilson rushed for 76 yards on 20 carries and added 1 TD. And Kendrick Bourne had 7 receptions for 76 yards. Titans versus Texans. The Tennessee Titans were looking to top the Texans and clinch the AFC South. The Titans, for the first time in 4 seasons, did not finish 4-7, but they needed a win to officially clinch the AFC South and a chance to make the playoffs. The Titans jumped out to a 17-0 lead as Ryan Tannehill threw 2 TD passes, both to A.J. Brown. The Texans got 3 field goals. For the Titans, Derrick Henry became the 8th player in NFL history to rush for 2,000 yards in a season. I think Derrick Henry should be in the MVP discussion. I think he's going to win Offensive Player of the Year as well. He joins Jamal Lewis, Chris Johnson, Barry Sanders, Terrell Davis, O.J. Simpson, Eric Dickerson, and Adrian Peterson. 5 of those 7 players I recently mentioned are just Hall of Famers. Tennessee would get 3 more touchdowns and a game-winning field goal by Sam Sloman to beat the Texans 41-38 in the final seconds, as Ryan Tannehill found A.J. Brown streaking down the field wide open, even though the Texans outscored the Titans 31-24 in the second half. Ryan Tannehill threw for 216 yards, 18 of 27, and 1 TD pass. Derrick Henry rushed for 250 yards on 34 carries and 2 touchdowns. It's now Derrick Henry 2K. A.J. Brown had 10 receptions for 151 yards and 1 TD. For the Texans, Deshaun Watson was 28 of 39 for 265 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Deshaun Watson also leads the league in passing yards with 4,823 yards. David Johnson rushed for 84 yards and 1 TD. Brandon Cook had 11 receptions for 166 yards and 1 receiving touchdown. And last but not least, Washington versus Philly. The battle for the NFC East took place on Sunday Night Football on NBC. Both teams had a losing record, but the WFT had a chance officially to clinch a playoff berth with a win over the Eagles. If they lost, the New York Giants, who beat the Cowboys on Sunday, would officially clinch the NFC East at 6-10. If that happened, the Giants would have the worst record to ever play in a full 16-game schedule to make the playoffs. But that would not be the case. Washington would get the job done with a 20-14 win over the rival Philly. Even though Washington did not play great, they jumped out to a 10-0 lead. The Eagles answered right back in the second quarter with 2 Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns to go up 14-10. Late in the quarter, Alex Smith would find Logan Thomas in the end zone to go up 17-14. In the second half, Washington got a field goal from Dustin Hopkins that would pretty much be the difference of the game. Both teams pretty much just punted the whole second half. And both teams turned the ball over and seemed like nobody wanted to win. The big topic of the game, however, was not the Washington football team winning. It was the Philadelphia Eagles benching Jalen Hurts in favor of Nate Sudfeld. Hurts had a pretty solid game, and nobody, including broadcasters Chris Collinsworth and Al Michaels, understood what Doug Peterson was doing. Washington stopped Philly in the closing seconds to seal their win. Washington 20, Philadelphia 14. Alex Smith was 22 of 32 for 162 yards, 2 TD passes, and 2 interceptions. Antonio Gibson had 75 yards on the ground. Cam Sims had 5 receptions for 53 yards. Jalen Hurts was 7 of 20 for 72 yards and 1 INT. Boston Scott rushed for 65 yards on 15 carries. Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. We release new episodes every Wednesday and Friday. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sports Town Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.